and welcome. I'm your host, Jamila, today, and this is the one-day summit for embodied stress release. This session is um, called Harnessing Stress, a polyvagal informed approach to peak performance with Mastin Kipp, who we're so lucky to have with us. And as we gather, we like to acknowledge that the land that we live and work on is the traditional territory of many indigenous peoples, and we respectfully honor these people, cultures, and traditions. And with that, let me go ahead and introduce you to our amazing guest for today, this session. We have Mastin Kipp, who is a best-selling author and creator of Function Life Coaching. His podcast top charts with more than 10 million downloads, recognized alongside the Dalai Lama and Watson's magazine of 100 most spiritually influential living people and an Oprah's Super Soul 100. Kip's selection for Oprah's Super Soul Sunday solidified his reputation as a leading thought leader for the next generation. And with that, I'd love to welcome you forward, Mastin. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Jamila, thank you so much for having me. And I was unaware of your policy to recognize First Peoples. So just as I reside here in West Hollywood, the Chumash people and the Tongva people are the people who were here originally. And typically that's how we start our events, but I was unaware that that's how you start your events also. So just want to give a shout out to how cool that is. And thank you for that. So today we're going to be taking, when I was talking with Scott about how to present on stress, there's so many perspectives on stress, specifically in the context of trauma, and this is the Embody Lab, and what we do also in functional life coaching is trauma informed. And so, however, the context of this conversation is not going to be about healing. Okay, so if you think about phases of one's journey, you can think about trauma healing in the context of, say, physical therapy, where there's certain contexts, certain appropriate steps to take to make sure that you're healing and getting more mobile and more able, more conditional, more able to act. This talk is not about healing. This talk is about performance, meaning getting back on the field, doing and living at your best, reaching new goals, stretching yourself, growth, etc. So we're very clear about that. We're talking about peak performance. We are not talking about healing. However, we're not going to bypass things that have happened to you. However, there is a way in which we approach peak performance or post-traumatic growth that is polyvagal informed. I'm assuming most people here know what polyvagal theory isn't. If you don't, I'll share with you here what it is in a second. But basically, at Functional Life Coaching, what we do is we help people understand the context of their history to be able to not repeat it as they move forward and as they grow and as they expand. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so I just want to make that really, really clear that this is not physical therapy. You're stepping into the gym. This is CrossFit. This is performance oriented. This is not a healing session, just so we're super clear about that. All right, let's go. Let's do it. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so my question for you is, it's a little bit of a counterintuitive question, but what if stress could be a superpower? What if it could be a superpower? The way that I like to think about stress in the context of performance is it's free energy, basically, right? Think about how much caffeine you might consume or other things we try to do to get energy. And a lot of times when we think about stress, we think about calming it down. And yes, there's a time and place for calm. In the context of performance, stress is also mobilization. It's about movement. It's about moving things through. And so in that context, and stress includes anger, any type of sympathetic activation of the nervous system. So what if that could be a superpower to help you reach the next level? That might be a little bit of a reframe for you in the context of stress. So today what we're going to talk about is how to think about performance, meaning reaching your next level, and using stress through a polyvagal lens. If you don't know what polyvagal theory is, I'll share with you what that is in a second. We're going to learn to differentiate eustress from distress. Basically, good stress from bad stress is the simple way to think about that. And then how to develop a polyvagal informed approach for peak performance and post-traumatic growth. So once you're out of physical therapy, how do you reach your next level? How do you go about achieving goals you've never achieved before? How do you go about reaching things you never reached before? That's what we're going to be going into today. Also, if you want to learn more about my work, I have a book called Reclaim Your Nervous System that just came out. It was endorsed by Dr. Stephen Porges, who's the author of Polyvagal Theory. And as a college dropout, I'm very proud of that. That's a rare thing to happen. So if you're interested in learning more from me, that is the book to check out. Now, my question for you is, I'd love for you to pop in the chat. right now in this moment, how do you currently experience stress in your life? Would you say it's mostly negative? Is it helpful sometimes, or is it generally positive? And just pop it in the chat and let me know how you, in the here and now, experience stress. Mostly negative, helpful. Okay, mostly negative. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Some helpful, some very few positives, mostly negative. Okay, that makes a lot of sense because when we think about stress, just the word, I know sometimes makes me feel stressed. And so we want to start to understand what stress really is in the context of performance. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. When do you feel the most safe and when do you feel the most stressed? Is there a certain environment? Is there a certain person? Is there a certain financial level? Is there something happening in your life? That's maybe a health or ill health. For the anxiously attached people, maybe you're the most stressed when the person you love is leaving. For the avoidantly attached, maybe you're most stressed when the person you love is coming back. Just kind of depends, right? So when are you most stressed and when do you feel the most safe? So time, work, indecision. Where else do you feel stressed or safe? I'm just kind of curious. If you think about healing, if you think about achieving goals. Let's see here. So uncertainty in nature. Yeah, love nature. Love that. Being debt free. Safety is my bed. Love that. Toxic environments are unsafe. Yes, a grief makes sense. Rumination, financial. Okay, got it. Okay, makes sense. Okay, so the thing about it is when we think about performance, okay, um, we want to reframe stress because when we first experience our bodies, it's scary, right? If you go from not knowing how you feel to knowing how you feel, unfortunately, you don't usually feel the good stuff first. You feel the panic, the fear, the sadness, the tension, the pain, etc. Usually our bodies will get our attention through pain. And so then we start to associate stress with bad, stress with don't want to feel. And we know that a regulated nervous system is not a calm nervous system. A regulated nervous system is a nervous system that can experience the full range of human emotion without becoming dysregulated long term, right? So basically, you can take a hit without being taken out because life will throw challenges at you. If you can recover from challenge, then you don't have a chronically dysregulated nervous system. And so, what we want to do is bring enough safety, not perfect safety, but enough safety to the next level. Now, to clarify, the old model of the nervous system, based on Langley's work from the 1920s, he released a book called The Autonomic Nervous System, is that we have these two systems. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest or digest, and we can be in one state or the other. Polyvagal theory comes around and helps us recognize that's not exactly accurate. So Stephen Porges' model of the autonomic nervous system basically says there's three branches to the nervous system. There's the dorsal vagal parasympathetic nervous system, which is immobilization, freeze, dissociation, when you're stuck, when you're not moving forward, when you're checked out of your body. That's more of a dorsal vagal response. We have a sympathetic response, which is fight or flight. I'm going to run, I'm going to flee. Anger could be in there as well. And the sympathetic nervous system primarily runs up and down the spine. And then we have our ventral vagal parasympathetic nervous system, which is associated with rest, digest, health, growth, and restoration. Notice that dissociation, checking out, not being in your body, and health, growth, and restoration are both parasympathetic experiences. So we want to differentiate these things so we can understand that it's like an inverted stoplight. You can think of ventral as green on top, you can think of sympathetic as yellow in the middle, and you can think of dorsal as red on the bottom. The creator of polyvagal theory, I'm not going to read all that. His name's Stephen Porges. He should be super well known to you by now. If not, he has upgraded our understanding of the nervous system for the first time in almost 100 years. And the primary partner he works with is Deb Dana, who's a dear friend. And Deb has taken Stephen's genius at science and translated it into clinical applications, primarily for therapy and primarily for healing. And she's a friend and mentor of mine. And her work has been foundational as well. And what we've done is taken that information and thought about, okay, how do we grow with it and go beyond healing? At a very high level, the three principles of polyvagal theory are the following. Neuroception. So neuroception is basically your body's threat detection machine below the neck, and it is unconscious. So our body is constantly scanning for safety or danger at an unconscious level. And a very basic example of this is, who's ever been hangry before? Where you realize you were angry because you were hungry. If that's you, just pop a yes in the chat. So I know I'm not the only one. Who's ever had that happen before? Yes? Okay. So most people, when they're hangry, don't know they're hangry until they're already angry and mad at somebody else, right? What that means is anger started before you were aware of it. It was outside your conscious awareness. So that's important to understand. So we have a bunch of things happening unconsciously in our body that's like, am I safe or not? Then there's a hierarchy, which I'll give you a visual on in a second, of dorsal, sympathetic, and ventral. And then the third sort of organizing principle of polyvagal theory is co-regulation, which is the mutual sending and receiving of safe signals through facial expression, body posture, etc. That could be called co-regulation or intersubjective regulation. And basically that means you and somebody else are sending each other happy faces or safe faces, safe vocal tone, safe body expressions, etc. And it's for the people on more of a codependent spectrum, this is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. So co-regulation is not you regulating somebody else. Okay, no, that's more anxious attachment. Co-regulation is there's no asymmetry. There's equality here, just so we're super clear about that. Okay, so the hierarchy looks a little bit like this. You have green at the top, yellow in the middle, and red at the bottom. Okay. And at the very top, we have the parasympathetic ventral vagal complex. That's social engagement, it's connection, it's health, it's growth, it's restoration. The sympathetic system is yellow, fight, flight, etc. And then dorsal is parasympathetic dissociation, depression, immobilization, etc. Now, what we know through polyvagal science is we drop down the ladder from green to yellow to red based on allostatic load increasing. Allostatic load means accumulation of stress over time. So the more stressed you are, the longer you hold your stress, you go from green to yellow to red. And nervous system states become personality traits over time. And so what this means is if I'm under enough stress for long enough periods of time, more than I can handle, I'm going to be frozen instead of in green, in yellow. I'm going to fight, I'm going to flight, I'm going to hustle, I'm going to make it happen, I'm going to be hyper vigilant, I'm going to make it go. And eventually, if I have too much stress, then I get down to red, I burn out, I stop, I dissociate, I check out, and I don't participate in life anymore. And if I'm in that state long enough, I think it's who I am. It becomes an identity. Who follows? Does this make sense? If this makes sense, just give me a thumbs up or yes. Okay. So the good news is it's predictable. We can drop up and down the ladder based on how much allostatic load or stress we're under. So the reason why most people think stress is bad or negative is because they just get stuck in so much stress that they never get a break. They handle people who have trauma histories are so resilient. They've been through so much. There's so much strength that you've gone through. And there's this power in like, oh my God, I'm so resilient. Part of healing is saying, I can handle a lot, but I don't need to anymore, right? Those are boundaries. Those are preferences and desires and things like that. Just because you're strong doesn't mean you need to always pick up the heaviest weight or find the most dysfunctional person and find out why they are emotionally unavailable. Okay? Like, you don't have to do that anymore. Okay, just so we're super clear. Now, let me put this into a slightly different frame so you understand. The standard window of tolerance model that was brought to us by Dan Siegel in late 1990s basically says that in the middle, we have this window of tolerance that's green. We have hyperarousal, which is I'm too stressed, and we have hypoarousal, which means I'm kind of like checked out. Who here is familiar with this on some level? You've heard of the window before on some level? Okay. So what polyvagal theory helps us realize is that we drop down in states based on how much stress or challenge or allostatic load we experience. So if we have a lot of stress, we go from green to yellow and yellow to red. Okay. And so a visual on this is as stress or allostatic load increases, then we decrease our states. So there is an amount of stress that we can no longer handle. And especially if you're a lone wolf, if we don't have co-regulation, we're not supposed to handle challenges alone. So it's very easy to drop down in states, especially if you're on your own or if you're on your own in a certain context. Like if you want to start a business and no one around you understands, well, you're going to drop down in your state typically because you have less connection and co-regulation. And so when we think about the polyvagal ladder, we can't really skip states when we've been stuck in one for a long period of time. So if you've been stuck in red for a long period of time, dissociated, checked out, etc., well, as you start to grow, as you start to heal, you get in touch with your anger, don't you? You get in touch with your stress, you get in touch with your panic, right? And we start to regulate that, understand it, befriend it, and recognize that, wait a minute, this isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes this adrenaline, this cortisol, my HPA axis wants me to move, not just calm the stress away. right? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But we want to recognize that if we're going from yellow and from red to green, and we can't skip yellow. So if you're hitting anger in your work, if you're hitting stress in your work, if you're trying to start something new, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, none of my work is working. What happened? You're rising up in a state because there's more challenge, right? Or you could be dropping down into yellow. But a lot of people have a fear of yellow because yellow is also usually the state that traumatizes somebody, right? Anger, frustration, rage, a lot of the trauma that's abuse-oriented trauma is sort of in a yellow type state. Neglect is what didn't happen to you. That's more of a red type state. But we tend to have a fear of yellow in a lot of ways. And so let's look at what the window could look at like through a polyvagal lens. So remember, we drop down in states from green to yellow to red as allostatic load increases. So on this bottom axis, we have safety, and then we have stress and allostatic load increasing as we go to the right. Okay, so the more allostatic load we have, the less safety that we have. So we're actually dropping down like this. And if I had to make it in the window of tolerance frame, let me give it to you in a slightly different visual so you understand. Okay, this is a little bit more accurate version of the window of tolerance. So on the bottom graph, we have allostatic load, which is how much stress you're experiencing. Okay, and on the left graph, we have sympathetic arousal, which is how much activation is happening in your system. And so when we're in ventral, there is some stress, and there can be some sympathetic arousal. Now, in the old model of the nervous system, we thought that you could either be in parasympathetic or sympathetic. But what we know now is that we can be in sympathetic and in parasympathetic in a ventral state. That's a flow state, right? When your time is just flying by, you're engaged in activity, you're doing a sport of some kind. That's a sympathetic ventral response. As allostatic load increases, sympathetic arousal goes way up. So that's when you're in, panic attacks, anxiety, stress, anger, all that type of stuff. We have massive sympathetic arousal. But because sympathetic is so expensive to maintain, we eventually will drop down into dorsal because we either burned out or because the stress is too much or the challenge is too much. So instead of a window, I want you to think of it more like this. We have levels of activation that are predictable, or deactivation that are predictable based on how much stress you have or don't have. So are y'all with me so far? So the basic idea here is that it's not just this static state of up or down. It's a predictable state of I'm going to go from green to yellow to red based on how much stress I'm experiencing over time, okay? Which brings me to this idea of eustress. Basically, eustress is positive stress response. It's optimal levels of stress. Because if we don't have enough stress, we're not actually moving and making things happen, right? So right now, I have a level of activation in my system that's allowing me to give this talk, for example, right? And so it's challenging but attainable. Okay, it's important to understand that, and it facilitates growth. Okay, distress is what we hear about when we hear post-traumatic stress. I've never heard of post-traumatic eustress. Never heard of it, right? Post-traumatic distress, traumatic stress, yes. Distress is a negative stress response that typically has some type of injury associated to it. It tends to be overwhelming. It tends to have a negative response, and we call it maladaptive. So there's eustress and there's distress. And to make it very simple and visual for you, if you think about stress arousal, if you got too much and you're over here, okay, this is distress, okay? And over here, this is eustress. We don't want no stress. We want to be somewhere kind of here. And depending on your capacity, this is different, right? If you've never gone into be able to train before in training with weights, you're not going to go pick up the 100-pound weight right away, right? So your eustress is completely different. What you can handle and what somebody else can handle is very different. But understand that stress is not binarily good or bad. It's about your capacity. Okay, so are y'all tracking with me so far? This idea of eustress and distress? Okay, beautiful. So how do we change then? How do we get out of it? Okay, so the term is neuroplasticity. That's the mechanism through which we make changes. And I love finding sort of original definitions. So William James, who's a Harvard psychologist, he was the father of basically modern psychology in the 1890s. This is what he says about neuroplasticity. He says plasticity then, in the widest sense of the word, means the possession of a structure weak enough to yield to an influence, but strong enough not to yield all at once. So what that means is neuroplasticity helps us recognize that you're not going to change immediately, but with enough influence over time, you could definitely change. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that makes sense, right? So the mechanism of change here is being able to have neuroplasticity and knowing how to use neuroplasticity in a way that benefits you, not in a way that harms you. Because if you used to feel good in your life, and now all of a sudden, like you've been through some type of trauma, or you've had some type of, divorce or some type of major loss or something, there's grief or something like that. Well, neuroplasticity can keep you stuck in a state that's not good for you also. So we want to recognize that neuroplasticity can go and help us get stuck in states that are helpful, and they can also help us be stuck in states that are not helpful. So does that concept make sense, y'all, to you? Right? So when we think about neuroplasticity, we don't want to think of it just in the context of positive change, because we can definitely have it in the context of negative change also. Okay. So when we look at the different types of neuroplasticity, I'll share them with you briefly. Okay, so there's developmental neuroplasticity. So that basically just kind of means that, like, what's happening with you when you're first born. There's experience-based neuroplasticity, where you have experiences, where you have an expectation of something that's going to happen. So if you've ever been neglected in childhood and you got traumatized because you didn't get something, something in you expected to get something it didn't get, right? So it's like, my mom never loved me, or my parents were they were not present. And so it's important to understand that, like, we have an expectation in our nervous system of what we should be getting. We should be getting oxygen, glucose, oxytocin, love, connection. Um, there's also neuroplasticity that's experience dependent, meaning you had an experience and it changed you forever, right? It could be someone passed, it could be a psychedelic experience, it could be an aha moment, right? There's also training-induced neuroplasticity, which is like, I'm going to train on purpose. I'm going to make these changes on purpose. And then there's learning-induced neuroplasticity, where typically you've learned something, like what's happening right now, and you go, oh, okay, that new information makes sense, right? Now, hear me now. The worst strategy for changing your life is relying on aha moments to happen at some point somewhere. My suggestion is to focus on training induced neuroplasticity over time. And that means that we want to walk into experiences that kind of feel like the things that you've been avoiding, but we create safety and a new level of titration and a new level of experience with them. So it's not dissimilar from somatic approaches for healing. It's just in the context of performance. And I'll give you an analogy. So when we build muscle in our bodies, there are three types of injury. Okay. The first type of injury is muscle soreness, delayed onset muscle soreness. Has anybody ever gone to the gym and your body hurt a couple days later, your muscles hurt? Has anyone ever had that happen before? Okay, that's called DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. Okay, the type 2 injury, when we look at hypertrophy and muscle building, is when you tear the muscle. Okay, so that's like injurious. You can't uh, you can't actually continue performance because you're so injured. And then there's a type 3 injury, which is just sort of like cramps or muscle soreness after exercise. That's to be expected. Maybe you've worked out so hard that, like, you can't work out anymore. Okay, so when you think about how we build muscle, okay, we train. So there's some type of challenge that we create, and believe it or not, there is a process called micro trauma in hypertrophy. Okay, and so micro trauma are these little tears in the muscle, where we get these little tears, but then we have proper nutrition and we recover. So you cannot get stronger without recovery. A lot of people think it's going to the gym that makes you stronger and lifting weights that makes you stronger. When you're lifting weights, you're actually tearing down the muscle. When you're recovering with proper nutrition, that's what makes you stronger. And so if we're weight training, I think it's very fascinating that in the literature on hypertrophy and muscle building, the term is micro trauma, right? As a trauma-informed person, I thought, like, that's very strange, because usually we think about trauma or stress as a negative, but then I started to realize, well, we actually need that to build muscle. Maybe we need that to reach our next level also. And so when we think about how to do that and how to transfer this, okay, it's a very interesting. Okay, so if we think about Peter Levine's concept of pendulation, which is the shifting of body sensations between expansions and contractions or safety or danger, very, specifically, very intentionally, right? If we think about pendulation, well, we can pendulate trauma from the past, but we can also pendulate the things that we want to create in the future. The same thing is true with the idea of titration, right? So Peter Levine has said that he borrowed the term titration from chemistry, where we gradually access energy of body sensation. That's not all at once. And I started to realize, hold on a second, this idea of how we build muscle, this idea of how we release trauma can be applied in a way to build emotional fitness, to build the next level for you, right? To be able to experience emotion that used to take you out in a way that doesn't take you out anymore. It's just affect. And so this idea of these three different types of stress responses. In fact, I'm going to skip this slide and make it then this next one just so it's even simpler for y'all. Okay. So we have three types of stress responses. We have beneficial stress responses where we can recover from them. Okay. That promotes growth. Okay. We have harmful stress responses that are overwhelming and traumatic, where we are so injured that we can't move on. And then we have sort of daily hassles, right? Your partner's face, maybe you're hangry, something happens, right? But we want to recognize that we actually, if you have trauma, it's a type 2 stress response. You experience so much stress, so much pain that you're injured and you're immobilized. You can't get out of it. It's like you have a broken leg, right? Who follows? Does that make sense? This idea of that type 2 rupture, right? However, we don't want to confuse that with a type 1, which is beneficial. And so it's the same basic idea. And so when we start to recognize these stress types, right, the first is challenging but energizing, right? It's the type that we want to induce. If you're starting a business, if you're learning how to have a good dialogue in a relationship, right? Sometimes you're going to experience some stress, but if you can recover and come back from it, ultimately it produces energy. I know people who are conflict avoidant, and when they realize they can have safe conversations and actually experience conflict and then be safe afterwards, they get the zoomies. It's like post-active listening zoomies, which is a really interesting phenomenon. Because usually when we're younger, if we try to challenge someone's conflict avoidant, there's a lot of pain associated with that. But our goal is to challenge you in a way that helps you come back. So it's not about not being triggered. It's not about not experiencing challenge. We don't want to experience so much challenge or hurt that it's traumatizing. And a lot of people confuse traumatic with activating, right? If you want more out of your life, you're going to have activation. If you want more love in your life, more joy in your life, more finance in your life, there will be activation. But just because you're activated doesn't mean it's traumatic, because for it to be traumatic, there would have to be long-term lasting negative effects in your life, basically, both in the outside world and also on the inside. Okay, so when we look at how to build emotional fitness, okay, it's recognizing that we are going to face tough emotions. So if you're here now experiencing tough emotion, notice that this is an opportunity in the moment to practice emotional fitness, right? And you're doing a good job by either breathing through that or speaking up or saying, you know what, I'm going to watch this later, read this later, get the transcript later. I'm taking a screenshot of his slides. You're taking good care of yourself, right? Those are examples of a training opportunity. And what happens is we tend to avoid training opportunities because it feels similar to the emotions or states that were traumatic for us in our past. But what we do is to build emotional fitness is we create specific training protocols for the individual. It's completely individual based on your experiences from the past. And we start to create micro trauma exposure to that in the future, right? So it could be like setting a boundary with a partner. It could be admitting that you have a desire. It could be, you know what, I'm finally going to post on social media, right? There could be some type of small thing. Then there's proper nutrition. And in this context, the proper nutrition is safe relationship, right? Safe co-regulation, other people to have the context with you. So if you're starting a business, it's not just being with your family, it's with being with fellow entrepreneurs. If you're trying to, uh, go to the next level in a relationship, it's about being around other people who have those types of relationships that you want to be around. So the co-regulation, the nutrition is being around people who have achieved similar results to what you want to achieve. And then there's also time for recovery, meaning get your sleep, have your boundaries, make sure that you're able to have proper nutrition and all those different types of things as well. Because If you're always in go mode, you're never actually recovering. And what starts to happen is we start to become dysregulated and stuck back in yellow. So the recovery piece, sleep, uh, time off, all those things is so very important. So very important because it's in the recovery that we actually build the muscle. Okay. And so that's an important piece to understand. So just like building muscle, we need type 1 and type 3 stress responses to build emotional fitness with hope but hopefully reducing and eliminating the type 2 ruptures, meaning no more trauma, right? It's sort of like a modified Mary J. Blige idea, right? Mary J said no more drama. I'm saying no more trauma, right? Because the idea is if you're around trauma that's injurious, it's causing you so much injury that you cannot move or you cannot perform, it's going to be impossible to build a new life. But we don't want to get all the trauma out of our life because we need micro trauma or exposure to things to come back and recover from, just like we're building muscle. And so when we look at the emotional fitness cycle, right, you can't always be regulated, right? The idea that I'm always going to be calm or I'm always going to be peaceful, that's not the world that we live in, right? We live in a world that's very uncertain. There's a lot of stressful sensory experiences available at any time, depending, especially if you're on social media or watching. We're in an election cycle right now. Lots of opportunity to be triggered if you want, for sure. Also, opportunity to take care of yourself and not expose yourself to things that activate you in that way. But the emotional fitness cycle is like this: we regulate, we dysregulate, and we re-regulate. And the fitness piece is the re-regulation. A lot of people, when they hear about nervous system regulation, believe or think that it means not becoming dysregulated. But what we really want to focus on is the re-regulation part, coming back to regulation. And for emotional fitness in this context, it's not about regulate, dysregulate, re-regulate regarding a traumatic past. It's about regulate, dysregulate, and re-regulate about who you're becoming, right? It can be dysregulating to set a boundary with a family member. It can be dysregulating to post on Instagram. It can be dysregulating to start a business. Dysregulation is a part of the game, right? But when you know that you can come back from it because you have safe co-regulation, because you know what, actually the dysregulation and the re-regulation is how I'm building muscle, all of a sudden everything starts to shift and everything starts to change because now I know, you know what, I can go there and come back. And I think that's one of the biggest differences in post-traumatic growth versus post-traumatic stress is we have this fear of being stuck in an emotion forever, right? If we think about when we were developmentally, when we were younger, maybe you were stuck in anxiety or anger, or maybe you were stuck in dissociation. You had to be invisible, right? And maybe you were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. Well, at that time, that was your entire life, right? So for your whole life, you were in these states. When we revisit these states for post-traumatic growth, parts of us that are frozen in time believe that if we go back to those states, that we'll be stuck in them forever. They tend to be shocked and relieved, those parts of ourselves tend to be shocked and relieved when they come to realize, wait a minute, I can visit sadness and come back. I can visit anger and come back. I can visit immobilization and come back. I can visit rejection and come back. Oh my goodness, right? It's the coming back piece that's so important. And so the secret to success is emotional optimization. It's not the avoidance of hard emotion. We want to intentionally create experiences where we are experiencing hard emotion, titrated, pendulated, right? It's going hard and then it's easy. It's hard and it's easy. I'm leaning in, I'm going back and I'm recovering. And when we do that towards a future that you want to create, everything shifts and everything changes because we are no longer avoiding the emotion, right? If what's interesting, if you think about this, what is an emotion, right? An emotion, all emotion is, it's a biochemical response in your body. That's all it is. And there are 7 primary emotional pathways that we have. And emotions happen automatically. Does anyone here like my personal favorite emotion to never feel is grief. If I would prefer to never feel, if I had like the genetic code to my own genes, I would just like delete it from my emotion. But like pop in the chat, what is the emotion that you spend the most amount of time avoiding? I'm curious. Is it grief? Is it sadness? Is it Is it positive feelings about yourself? Maybe it's not taking in something, right? Someone gives you a compliment and all of a sudden they're like, you know what? Like, oh, I can't take that in, right? What would it be for you? I'm curious. Anxiety, shame, guilt, avoiding anger. Okay. So here's our anger, a lot of anger, a lot of shame. Okay. So think about this for a second. Okay. Think about this for a second. The thing that you're afraid of feeling is an emotion. An emotion is a biochemistry. It's a biochemistry that your body produces. It's mind blowing to me to consider that when I'm afraid of an emotion, I'm afraid of myself. I think that is a mind blowing concept, right? What is trauma in the body but sensory experiences that happened within us that we gave a certain meaning to consciously or unconsciously that froze us in a certain state for a period of time? When we're in our experience of our trauma, we're in our experience of our own sensory system. Yes, outside influences cause that to happen many times, of course, right? The environment plays a big role in it. But at the end of the day, when we think about fear, shame, guilt, anger, etc., those are emotions. Those are us, right? The pit of your stomach, right? That's a feeling inside your body. Emotions that you're feeling are feelings inside your body. Now, let me ask a question. Who here feels like because of your trauma history, because of your childhood, or because of something hard that you went through, you were able to use dissociation very well to not experience that? I'm curious. If that's you, just raise your hand or say yes in the chat or let me know. Okay. Okay. Who here would it be fair to say dissociation helped you get through something hard? I'm curious. Yes? Who here feels like you're a champ at dissociation? You got it down. You're like primed on it. Okay. Now I've tricked you a little bit with this question. Okay. And here's what I mean by that. Okay. Here's what I mean by that. When we look at performance, okay, most performers, high performers, actually use dissociation on purpose, right? And Janina Fisher actually talks about this in her work around dissociation. But dissociation on purpose that you leverage to change your life is not traumatizing, because when you think about when we're in trauma and dissociation caused by trauma, it's something we didn't choose, something that we didn't want, something that we're now responding to in a way that's keeping us resilient. But think about this. If you dissociated from trauma that hurt you and the dissociation hurt you, and you're good at dissociation, couldn't you also use dissociation to grow? Couldn't you also dissociate from things that are keeping you stuck in the present so that you can move forward? It's using dissociation on purpose in a different way. And we also want to be able to use dissociation in a way that's not chronic. It's not your default state. So when we think about dissociation from trauma, the problem is we become fragmented in our dissociative states chronically. So we're always stuck in these dissociative states. And on major spectrums, that's when you get things like DID and stuff like that. However, if you're good at dissociation, you could dissociate from the things that are keeping you stuck here and now. In fact, when we think about creating new parts of ourselves, part of the mechanism of creating new parts of ourselves is dissociation, because we're checking out of the present to consider what we might want to create in the future and then bringing the future here as well. So dissociation in and of itself is not a negative thing. If we're chronically and unconsciously stuck in dissociation because of something that we were forced to endure that we did not want, that has traumatic effects. However, we can also leverage the concept of dissociation to be able to grow, to be able to heal, and to be able to create a new reality. Because if you think about your next level in your life, okay, the next level of your life is something you've never had before. And if you're basing what's possible for you on what's real and what's basing on reality, well, there's no way that you could create a new life because the new life hasn't happened yet, right? I think Bessel van der Kolk says that we have to be unrealistic in our expectations of healing trauma, because if we are realistic, then we would never be able to actually heal trauma. Because if we're realistic, we're going to base everything based on the past. The same thing is true, I believe, about the future. We have to be unrealistic about what's possible. And here's the thing, y'all. I'm here at the Embodied Lab. Y'all are bottom-up folk who are like really into somatics, which I am as well. Okay. At the end of the day, here's my mantra, no matter what I'm feeling. Okay. It's just an emotion. This is just a feeling. This is just a feeling. This is just a feeling. This is just it. That statement has changed my life. It saved my life, right? And guess what? If you want to grow to the next level, if you want to reach high performance, we have to learn how to not allow our emotions and our feelings to dictate our decisions. They can inform our decisions, but we want our emotions and our feelings to be able to inform them, but not be the CEO. When we're in a ventral state, we have our prefrontal cortex available, we can make a new decision. And when we make a new decision, it's not going to stick at once. Because remember, with neuroplasticity, it takes time. So these are lived experiences that we have to have over time to challenge ourselves to revisit old emotions, dissociate from them slightly to be able to create a new future, and in a way that's not so stressful that we injure ourselves long term. Okay. So I'm going to give you one more visual slide here that will, I think this visual aid will ground what I'm saying for especially for my visual learners in a really powerful way. So one of my dear friends is Dr. BJ Fogg. He is the director of the Stanford Behavior Design Lab, and he is like an expert in behavior design. And basically, he has this model. It's called the Fogg behavior model. Now, this line right here, this blue line, is the action line, meaning anything above this line, when the right circumstances appear above this line, you will take action on something. Okay, so let me explain what this means. On the bottom axis here, we have ability. So down here, we have what's hard to do. And at here, we have what's easy to do. Okay, on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have motivation. So we have low levels of motivation, and up here, we have high levels of motivation. Okay, to enact a behavior, BJ says we need motivation, ability, and a prompt. So we have to have the motivation to do it, we have to be able to do it, and we have a prompt to do it. So what this basically means is if you have if something is really hard to do and you have low levels of motivation, it's not going to happen. Right? If something's really easy to do, you don't need a lot of motivation. Okay. So I'll give you a very practical example. Okay. So let's just say that one of your goals in life is you don't want to sleep in anymore. Okay. So let's just say that you put your alarm directly next to your bed. Okay. How easy is it to push snooze? If the alarm goes off, how easy would it be? What do you think? Pretty easy, pretty hard, very easy. Okay. So what that means is if it's easy to do and if it has very low motivation, okay, then it's going to happen. Right. So for example, I make something hard to do that I want to stop doing. So for example, I don't want to push snooze. So what do? I put my alarm on the other side of the bedroom, which means it's harder to turn off. So I actually have to get out of bed, and the likelihood of me doing more once I get out of bed is very high. Okay. So the other thing is to realize that motivation is a finite resource. So we don't always have sustainable motivation. And in personal development, in the coaching space, we are so guilty of just being like, just motivate yourself to change, right? I have a lot of defiant parts. They're like, you motivate yourself to change. What are you talking about? Like I get very defiant in that because sometimes it's too hard to do, or I don't have the ability to do it. And so it's important to understand that the best thing to do to be able to move your life forward is to look at the areas of your life that you want to transform and ask yourself, what's one thing I can do to make this easier to do, right? It could be body doubling, where you just have a session where you and a friend hop on Zoom, you don't talk, you just work together, right? It could be something very simple. So the idea is, because especially we're so used to holding so much, if we have trauma histories, we're used to holding more than we can handle for longer periods of time. And the truth is, especially if you had trauma when you were younger, you didn't really have the ability to be your parents' parents, right? You didn't have the ability to be a competent protector to your parents. Even if you were, tasked with that idea, parentified children are children who take on the role of their parents, right? That is too much too soon. And we can just bring that right into adulthood if it's not left out. And so one of the things that we want to think about in this concept of eustress versus distress is we want to be really real with ourselves about, hold on a second, when I think about where I'm stuck, how hard is this to do? How could I make it easier to do? In fact, we don't really want to rely on motivation. We want to be able to, because motivation is so finite, we want to be able to focus on making things easier. And so a polyvagal informed version of this looks like this, okay? we have allostatic load. How stressed am I? Okay. And sympathetic activation. So I need a lot of sympathetic activation to do hard things. Right. And the problem is if I am in sympathetic too long, that's when I burn out. That's when I no longer am able to function. That's when I have HPA access issues or gut issues or adrenal fatigue and all that different chronic illness and all the different type of stuff starts to happen if you're in sympathetic way too long because your body is using all of its resources to try to mobilize. So we want to work on making things easier to do. And I will suggest to you, especially if you had a childhood where you grew up where things were difficult, where maybe you were the one who had to do what your parents couldn't do, that you're used to taking on things that you're too hard for you to do. And then you beat yourself up for not being able to do it long enough, right? Because it's back when we were younger, it's like that's what I had to do to survive. I think it's important to start to say that, you know what, I'm going to create a training protocol where I can actually start to do the things that I'm afraid of doing. I'm going to regulate, I'm going to dysregulate, and I'm going to re-regulate on simple tasks. And I'm going to create enough momentum in that area to recognize, you know what, this now becomes a habit. It's not just a habit, this is becoming automatic. And when we start to do that, uh, we get more automaticity because it becomes a ritual over time. But you can't build a habit if what you're trying to do is too hard. So we want to reduce challenge. The final analogy I'll give you, then we'll pop into some Q&A, is if your goal, metaphorically, is to say bench press 200-pound dumbbells, right? And you don't want to walk into the gym and grab 200-pound dumbbells if you've never done it before. You probably want to start just with your body weight and like showing your body like this is how I'm gonna do this. Then I'm gonna grab the 2.5s and then maybe the fives and then maybe the tens, and we work our way up. The same thing is true for creating our future. And we want to keep it as simple as possible. And we want to recognize that to grow, to perform, is to not be activated. It's to not be triggered. It's to have a playbook and a plan and emotional muscle that when we get dysregulated, we can come back into regulation. And we want to keep our tasks as simple as possible in forward motion so that we can make things easier to do and be aware of how much stress we have in our life. And if you're not aware of that, just look at the areas where you're procrastinating, where you're stuck, where you're frustrated, where you're overwhelmed. If you're not able to think of it, just look at what you complain about. Typically, what you complain about are unmet needs in disguise. If you just take complaints and you turn them upside down, those become goals. And so I'm going to pause there because I'm seeing in the chat that there is a lot of information being taken in. So I think this is a great time for some clarifying questions and Q&A, given how much curiosity and questions there are about that. Jamila, what do you think about that? Is that a good idea? I have more slides, but I'm just kind of feeling the pulse.
Yeah, let's take maybe 2 or 3 questions and then we can go back into slides and see if more questions are there. And just a reminder, everyone, feel free to go in the Q&A and upvote the questions you share with a thumbs up because it helps us find the questions that are most beneficial to all of us. So right now, Paulette's question has an upvote. It's around the relationship with ADHD stress response and the nervous
Yeah.
system. Whether it's the withdrawal isolation tendency or the RSD, most of the stress responses are big or too much, even the good responses. Can you
Mm.
speak to that?
Yes,
Nicole?
I'm going to speak to that with a disclaimer. So I am a coach who's a college dropout. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm not a medical professional. Just so we're very clear about that. However, I have 3 types of ADHD that I manage. I'm dyslexic, so I have lived experience. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm also a reader, so I can read. So I can read the DSM-5 and look at its diagnostic criteria, and I can read research. Okay, so just so we're very clear, though, this is not medical advice. Okay, when we look at ADHD and sensory issues. Usually, if we look especially at Gabor Mate's work and Scattered and sort of how he thinks about ADHD, which really resonates with my lived experience, ADHD sometimes can have its roots in uh, caregivers who are not present when we're younger. And so we're not getting our attentional networks wired up properly, number one. So we don't have a lot of executive function. The other thing that's really interesting is that when you look at like the stimulants that are required to help with ADHD, they work on the dopamine pathways primarily, right? Adderall and Ritalin and all that stuff. I know this because I still take Adderall to this day, XR. And so what's interesting is that oxytocin, which is the love hormone, which is when we have secure functioning, secure attachment, when we have close relationships, oxytocin is flooded throughout the body. Sue Carter did a whole body of work on this, who's Stephen Porges' wife. What's interesting about oxytocin is oxytocin is dopaminergic, meaning it produces dopamine, right? So I think of ADHD as yes, okay, yes, I'm neurodivergent, got it. And what's also true for me is that I did not have present parents. And so I feel like I'm all by myself and I don't know what to pay attention to because I don't know what's important because nobody's showing me the ropes. And that was my baseline growing up. And so when we look at um, how I've managed my ADHD, and you could think about people who are on the autism spectrum as well, that what a lot of us have in common who are neurodivergent is sensory difficulties. And so that's where we want to titrate exposure and pay attention because with enough attention or attunement to yourself or to others, you can see what's activating or not activating. You can start to pay attention to, you know what, that sound level that's too much sound or that's not enough sound. That light level is too bright or too dim. And that comes with some testing. But I think that for me, what's most regulating for me as someone with ADHD is attunement from other. When somebody else is attuned to me, it really helps me handle stress in a really major way. However, if I'm only relying on other people to be attuned to me, I'm turning everyone into my parents. So I have to also be attuned to myself and be able to pay attention to my internal cues and try to catch them faster. But basically, our sensory perceptions um, uh, are able to be regulated when we know how to pay attention to them and when we let other people know what's happening for us also. And so that would be sort of my recommendation. And then that would becomes experimentation. And if you can have co-regulation, a shared context with somebody else around this, that is a very healing experience and is a very beautiful environment upon which you can start to create more growth in your life also. So yeah. That's what I would say to that.
Really helpful. Thank you so much. Key has a similar question. Key, do you feel like your question was answered by that explanation? If not, feel free to raise your digital hand and we can take one question live from you because it is kind of similar with the physical sensations. And in the meantime, so feel free to raise your digital hand, Key, if you want to ask your question. But we'll move to, oh, there it is. All right, let me go ahead
Yay.
and bring you up so you can
Co-regulation. Let's do it.
ask your question. Feel free. Okay, Key, you're unmuted.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, hello. Thank you for the wonderful session.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know how through somatic therapy, this anxious responses can be regulated in a better way. We have a lot of physical sensations going on with the around the chest, the different parts of the body, the legs, the hands.
Yes,
So I just wanted to know how do we, come back to uh, regulation during those times.
sure. Great question. So I'm giving disclaimers out left and right here. So first, I'm not a therapist, just so we're super clear about that. Also, I'm a coach. I'm a college dropout, just so we're very clear about that. But my knowledge base is pretty significant, just so we're very clear. Okay. Um, Again, I can read, and I've read the somatic therapy books. Here's what I'll tell you. Okay. When somebody starts a somatic journey, it's because their body is trying to get their attention. Okay. It's tried for a long time. And when we start to pay attention to what's inside, that's called interoception. Okay. When we start to pay attention to what's inside, unfortunately, we tend to be able to pay attention to the stuff that's not fun first. You're going to feel the stuff that's hard to feel first. Right. And there's a difference between somatic. Now, Scott might disagree with me, and that's okay. And if he does, like, go with Scott because he's a somatics expert. But my belief is that somatics is of the body and emotion are biochemistry, and those are different things. Decoupling those things is very important. If I'm healing something, what I want to do is bring attention to it. I want to bring awareness to it, and I want to befriend it, and I want to welcome it in without letting it drive the ship. I don't want to let the purpose of parts work and somatic work is not to let the most traumatized parts of our system run your life. Okay. Just so we're really clear about that. Okay. It's not like, oh, here's my panicked inner child. Here, you make all my life decisions. Like, no, 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 no. Right. What that part needs or what that somatic response needs is a befriending, a turning towards. Because usually the things that we can't experience in ourselves are what our caregivers could not experience in us also, which is why we don't pay attention to them. So it's about paying attention, and any practice, unfortunately, that tries to go about eliminating parts of you will be unsuccessful. Okay. I feel like sometimes people hire me to be their parts hitman. where it's like, all right, Maston, how we're gonna kill my procrastinator? I'm like, that's not really how it works, right? We need to love up on your procrastinator. So if it's a healing context, what we want to do is understand how to feel that part of ourselves without being taken out. We want to understand, is it moving in a certain way? What does it feel like? What are the sensations? Are there any stories in there? We want to befriend it, turn towards it, and validate it. Now, that's more of a healing context, okay? However, if we just stay there, what I'm talking about is performance, right? So in the performance context, usually what we want to say is, especially if it's a sympathetic response where there's more like activation, anger, stress, etc., it's what am I going to do with this? How is this part of me asking to move? And the assumption is you already have a good relationship with that part so that you will not bypass it, you will not ignore it, you will not push it out of awareness. If you are not able to have a good relationship with your hard emotions or physical sensations, it's hard to go into performance because what we'll do is we'll just push them aside and then they cause us to have chronic illness and all kinds of problems in our body and injury and stuff like that. And so we want to befriend, and then we want to put our regulated self in charge. And then eventually, in the performance context, that anxiety is asking you to move. It's like, hold on a second, I don't have the money that I need, or I don't have the relational support that I need, or something that I don't need is present. Let's take action. And that's when we can start to use executive function, prefrontal cortex, hopefully co regulation of others who have produced that outcome to be able to help you move that along. So in a healing context, it's about befriending. It's about being the parent to that part of you or that sensation that your parents never could be. And in performing, it's more about saying, thank you, now let me get into action. And there's a dance between those two things because if the problem is, if we only stay in our feelings, we're not going to create a new life, right? Um, if we never pay attention to our feelings, then we're going to crash and burn. We want to learn how to have a dance. And the cool part about this whole thing, it's about your intention. Today, right now, in this moment, unlike in your history, you have a choice to do the healing or the growing. It's your choice. And that's the catch 22 about parts work and somatic work is that once you know, then you have a choice. And that's called adulting, by the way. There's a part of us that does have to adult and take responsibility for what's happening now, even if what happened wasn't our fault. So what happened to you isn't your fault, but what's happening now is your responsibility to shift and change. And that is a process of maturation and maturity also. But if we're healing, we're befriending. If we're performing, we're befriending with new action to get that need met. So I think hopefully that
Mm.
answers the question.
Thank you so much, Maston. You're getting so much love also in chats of
Yay.
appreciating how you reframe all of these things. Speaking of, so I'm going to combine Ginny and Ab's question because they're similar
Sure. Okay.
around over so much harmful stress. When it feels like so much harmful stress is coming at us all the time, how do we reframe that into beneficial stress? And Ab's question was about a work environment where you've
Yeah.
been with long periods of this stress. Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the good news, bad news. So part of my slides, which I can show, but I can get bottom line here is environment. Okay. So this idea of nature versus nurture. Okay. What's going to win over the long run is environment. Okay. Over the long run, the environment will dictate. So you cannot out heal your environment. You just can't. Okay. And depending on the context of that question, it's not appropriate to ask someone to do that also, just so we're very clear. If the environment is inherently biased or traumatizing towards an individual or a group of people, it's not fair or appropriate to ask that person or group of people to regulate themselves in an environment that's designed to cause them harm, right? So an example of that would be Viktor Frankl or many of the Jewish people who were in concentration camps or Auschwitz. Like you're not going to outregulate environments like that. Now, Viktor Frankl did create logotherapy and did propose the concept, which it seems to be true that with enough purpose, you can find purpose in something hard. But even then, it's not going to be forever, right? It's a very short period of time. I mean, it's a long period of time, but comparatively, it wasn't generations and decades and decades and decades. It was a very short period of time, less than 10 years. Now, a lot of bad things happened during that 10-year period, but that's different than, say, the United States, where we have systems designed to oppress certain people versus other people. Like the system is set up that way. Germany was not set up with the systems inherently being anti-Semitic, Germany was set up differently, and then a regime came in, but the country itself was not. The success of the country of Germany was not based on a certain group of people being won down to another group of people. So in an environment that is traumatizing for a certain person, you're not going to have a regulation strategy. The regulation strategy is get out of the environment, just so we're really clear. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to cope, and you have to name, this environment is too much for me, and I'm proud of the fact that I'm getting through it. But ultimately, the goal is to get out of the environment, because the environment will always win. With that being said, with the right environment, the inverse is also true. So we want, eventually, for me, I think one of the best privileges of life is to be in environments that help you match the future that you want to create, that are safe enough for that to happen, that have the people that are safe enough, to have the resources that are safe enough. But you cannot out willpower an environment. Um, you just can't do it. We must be in environments and scenes and settings and relationships where there's enough safety. And I define enough safety as 50.0001% safe. Not 100% safe, but just more safety than non-safety.
Got it. Love that. Thank you. I think we should get back to the slides. There was a question about compliant goals. I don't know if you can throw something really quick about that, just going over that quickly. But yeah, I think also a lot of people want to get back to what else you have in store for us
Okay.
today.
Let me just get to that then. I'm not sure what compliant goal that means.
Complaint goals, excuse me, sorry.
Complain about
Complaint
unmet.
to go, complaint.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I got it. Yeah. So basically, if you think about, like, if you ask people, like, what do they want most of the time, they're going to go, I don't know. Right. Usually. Um, and so, it's really easy, though, to look at what you complain about, because usually most people are very aware of what they complain about. It takes resources to think about what you want. So let's just say that a complaint would be, my partner is always late, right? Well, if I just invert that, my desire is for them to be on time. So if you just take the opposite of your complaint, usually that's going to be um, what you want, basically, on some level, is the opposite of that. So if he's always late or she's always late, then I want them to be on time. If you know nobody ever understands me, then I want to feel understood, or whatever it might be. So typically the opposite of a complaint is what you want or need, basically. So that's a fast way to get there. Okay, so I can go back to slides if you want for a little bit.
Yes, let's
Okay,
do it.
cool. All right, y'all. So this is kind of piggybacking on what I just said, nature versus nurture. So I'll do this kind of briefly because I already kind of said it. But basically, nature refers to sort of our biological and genetic predispositions, right? Nurture is our environment. So it's kind of like, maybe is she born with it? Maybe it's Maybelline or whatever, right? Like that whole idea, right? So we don't really know. Most of the time, it's going to be nurture. When people say, well, you can't heal trauma because of genes. Well, genes change because of your environment. So that's a non. Rachel Yehuda does beautiful work on the epigenetics of trauma. If you're interested in the deep dive on that, gene expression is basically how our genes react to our environments. Okay, and so I'm not going to go super into this, but we have two different sort of mechanisms within genetic expression: DNA and RNA. And I'm not going to read these to you because this next slide makes it super simple. DNA is your potential. RNA is what's actually expressing. Okay, so gene expression being turned on or turned off is the potential for stress or regulation is all within our DNA for it to express a certain way. RNA says, okay, based on the environment, here's what we're going to do about it, basically. Okay. And so what that basically means is we're born with the potential for stress. We're born for the potential with healing. Our environment dictates this. And Rachel Yehuda is developing a gene test at the moment. She's identified the stress gene. And pretty soon, I think there'll be tech where you can do like a saliva test, and they'll be able to say, okay, you need like 40 somatic experiencing sessions based on this genetic expression to be able to help you down regulate or whatever it might be. So it's very interesting how we're learning more and more and more about how our genes express. But basically, we have the potential to, I mean, some people are born with certain genes that have the potential for cancer, but may or may not cause cancer based on their own environments. Okay. And this is well researched, right? So we know in the research that environment and lifestyle factors influence our genetic expression, right? So that's important to understand. This is not just me talking. We know that our lifestyle choices matter. We also know that our health depends on how we interact with the environment. And so, um, and again, if an environment is biased towards certain people, then different people are going to interact or be healthy or not in that environment. It's kind of depending. So I want you to think of environment as being key, right? The people that you're around, the places that you're around, how much safety do you feel there? And there are two environments for you to think about. Okay. There's two environments for you to think about. There is your inner environment and your outer environment. Okay. So there's what's happening outside you and what's happening inside you. So when we look at some inner environment things to consider, right? It's mindset, it's executive function. Can I think about things? How's my gut health? My somatic awareness, which is my awareness of my body, right? How's my inflammation doing? How are my hormones? How's my brain? How flexible is my nervous system? How's my immune system doing? Do I feel like I have an internal or external locus of control? What that means is, do I feel like the power to change my life is outside me or inside me? Right? Some people feel like the power to change is outside and somebody else's approval, somebody else's permission, somebody else's yes, right? Versus having locus of control that's internal. Having your inner world validated versus invalidated, right? That's called gaslighting. I just don't like that term because people use it incorrectly all the time. Most people use gaslighting as what they really mean is disagree. So we're really clear. Also, someone should write a book on how to be ungaslightable. That's a different topic, though. Okay, so food allergies and sensitivities, sleep quality, emotional health, hydration levels. So these are things that we want to be focusing on for our own inner environment. And again, without the external environment being supportive, a lot of this stuff doesn't matter because, like, you can't out probiotic a traumatic environment. Like, there's no amount of probiotics or, like, omega-3s or whatever if you're in a traumatic environment that's causing you harm. Okay, now outer environment factors, cues of safety around you, that could be from people, places, things, cues of danger. Right, we're in the political season right now. Why is everyone so triggered by the other side? Because we perceive the other side as dangerous. Okay, that's why. Okay, and we put names and labels on it, but the cues that they send to each other are cues of danger. And that's why everyone gets so triggered these days. Okay, level of toxin exposure in the environment. For example, most cancers come from environmental toxins. Whether the outside environment is organized or disorganized matters, especially for somebody like me with ADHD. Are you in proximity to the tools that you need? Right? Is the thing that you actually need close or not? Right? That could be financial resources. That could be the internet. It could be a camera. It just kind of depends, right? Are you in proximity to people with well-regulated nervous systems? Right? For me, I love my friends and they can be dysregulated around me when they go through stuff, but, like, in general, I don't want to be around you if you're dysregulated. As a baseline, it's just not for me. It's just I don't want to do it. Quality of the food that you're eating, the proximity to mentorship, right? Are you able to get feedback and support and help when you get confused? The facial expression and tone of voice of the people around you matters tremendously. Also, who here knows somebody that one tone and you're just already dysregulated? There's a certain tone, right? Or they make a face, right? Like, right? So unfortunately, those are unconscious responses, right? Also, your space versus shared space, right? Do you have your own space where you can be you and not be impacted by other people? Wi-Fi and EMF exposure, and temperature during sleep. The appropriate temperature to sleep at is 60 degrees, and anyone who disagrees is wrong. No, I'm just kidding. That's just my preferred temperature. I don't understand. And by the way, I feel like the people who like it colder are right because, like, if you're cold, you can add more blankets, but if you're hot, you can't. At some point, you can't take anything else off, right? So I feel like you should default to the cold person. That's my bias. Just so we're super clear about that too. Okay. Okay. So the last thing I'll say is, and this is going to be contrary to somatics, but this is actually somatics, I think. Okay. Again, if Scott disagrees, then go with Scott. But Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, says you can't think your way into right action, but you can act your way into right thinking. I believe that's a bottom-up statement, right? So we don't want to wait around for the thinking to be there, for the emotion to be there. Sometimes behavior change is bottom up, and we can't wait to feel good about it first, right? If I waited to exercise until I felt good about it, I would never exercise. Right? A lot of times I feel better after words, right? So that's important to understand. So when we look at sort of the hierarchy of nature versus nurture in a very bottom lined way, we want to look at like, how is my trauma healing doing? Okay. How is my nervous system flexibility? How's my gut health? Right. That's kind of the baseline. Okay. We want to look at the quality of the external environment also. And then we want to look at the quality of the mindset and your executive function, your ability to actually do cognitive reappraisal, which is making a new choice in the presence of a trigger, right? Cognitive reappraisal is not bypassing your emotions. Young, traumatized parts of ourselves like us to think that sometimes because it's convenient, because it's scary to change. But making a new decision is not always bypassing. Bypassing a part of you is casting it out of your awareness. Cognitive reappraisal and making a new choice is, yes, I hear you. Yes, I see you. Yes, I feel you. I love you. You're also 5 years old and you're not in charge. We're going this way and you're coming with us. Um, in my faith, uh, he says, leave the 99 to get the one. But when you bring the one back, you don't put the lost one in charge of the flock. JC is still leaving the flock, basically, or your executive function is still leading the flock. Just so we're super clear about that. Okay. Sometimes we find our traumatized parts and we're like, you're in charge now, right? No, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we can have good executive function and mindset fueled by an external environment that's helping us match our life that we want to create. And hopefully we have some trauma healing, we have some nervous system flexibility, and then we have some general gut health so that we have the internal states necessary to take the external action sustainably. And that's basically the slides.
Yay. Thank you.
I
Thank
think I just went 1 minute over, so sorry about that.
you. You did amazing. No, thank you so much, Mastin, for this amazing workshop today.